And with that, welcome everyone to Numbers Therapy, episode 19. Today's episode is titled Regenerative Finance and Turkish Adoption. That should leave you a little bit intrigued, but I promise you will like this topic, and we are taking off further from here. So first, a brief note from a sponsor. If you're listening on here, it means you're probably below a certain age, and it probably also means your parents or even grandparents have no idea what you're into with Web3, NFTs, tech, social media. Generational Bridge has got your back. Every Saturday, the award-winning newsletter goes out teaching parents and boomers about lingo trends and implications of what us younger people are doing. I say that loosely for myself. The result, your parents understand and appreciate what you're doing. Special access for MVHQ members. It's the best thing and maybe you'll read all week. A couple announcements before we start. So Spotify's moving. We've got more episodes loaded by the week, available for downloads. Follow and check us out. We've also got some cool features and tricks coming your way as well to dial up the show even more. Do continue to want feedback from our crowd in terms of what you want to hear. So this show, of course, is for MVHQ and beyond. And lastly, our application to be a guest on Numbers Therapy is out there. It can guide you if you're not familiar with where it is. So for framing purposes, the purpose of Numbers Therapy is to talk through all of the macro and bring on and showcase our experts in here. More specifically, to understand how all of the big pieces fit together, make better decisions with NFTs and other investments using a balanced perspective, learn about or from some of our people in here to get different perspectives, and learn about different areas and opportunities that exist out there as well and different ways of thinking. Also, I always say as a reminder, there are different levels, of course, in here for anybody who's listening live. It's really important that everybody's along for the full ride, right? So if there's any information or question that you have and you're listening live right now, be it a definition or an acronym you don't understand, please drop that question into the guest questions tab. We'll make sure we answer it along the way so you can follow along completely. Also, if you have more, intermediate or advanced questions, please drop those in as well. Lastly, important note and disclaimer, none of what you hear in here is financial advice. It is all opinions. So without further ado, and on to today's guest and episode, I'm very excited about today's show. We're going to cover two very interesting topics. One is the concept of regenerative or value-add finance. And don't worry if that's not clear to you. We're going to be talking that through. I'm even going to be learning with you as well. So we've got a real, good expert in here today on that. And secondly, we're going to be talking about Turkey as well, which again, to me, is another one of those anomaly countries because they majorly over-index in crypto and Web3, even versus countries with like a similar income level, age breakdown, and other similar factors. So we're going to try to pull that apart too. So my dude on today, I've appreciated having him around and getting to hear his theoretical thoughts. Definitely my jam, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. As with a couple recent guests, I got stuck on a rainy NYC cruise ship with him, and as a result, got to talk about a variety of topics. I've also enjoyed seeing him take some time to create TikTok videos and always enjoy hearing what he has to say. So check him out there too. He hails from Istanbul these days, and the alpha suggests he's gone blonde recently. So I just love the fact that the dude is always thinking and evolving while having some fun too. I'm happy to have him as a sparring partner and friend, and I think that you'll really enjoy the conversation today. So please welcome to Numbers Therapy, my dude, Tyler Scharf. Tyler, what's going on today, dude?
Oh, thanks for exposing all my deep, dirty secrets there. I don't tell anyone about all of those things, but yeah, happy to be here. Now it's all out in the open.
The alpha is, what's the latest hair color? That's the real question that exists, but I'm assuming we're going blonde. So let's start where all shows start. Let's talk about maybe background pre-NFTs. So what was your background pre-NFTs and before NFTs became a thing? Where were you focused? What were you working on? Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
I have quite a diverse background that ranges in quite a few things. Like I have been mostly entrepreneurial. I've been in kind of like, even when I was a teenager, I was running a kitchen as a sous chef. I was running a crew, doing some distribution businesses back in Canada. Then I went abroad to go and explore the world. And I started some education, coaching, businesses like that. I opened up a vegan restaurant in India, travel agency. So, I've been all over the place, to be honest.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And that's going to probably play into today a little bit too, by the way, with regenerative finance. So I'm excited to talk about that a bit more. So I guess from there, the question is how did you hear about NFTs originally? Like, what was your story? Was it your friends? Did you hear from something else? Like, what was that story?
So like I've been in crypto since, I remember looking at Bitcoin when it was like about $650 in 2017 and thinking that it's ridiculously overpriced and there's no way it's ever going to be worth more than gold. And I was a little bit of maybe like libertarian or anti-establishment type. So I was like looking for alternative investments and stuff, but I thought like this Bitcoin thing is really overhyped. So I kind of like sat on my hands during the last bull run in 2017 to 2018. And then when it started coming down back to about like reasonable levels, I decided to go into it because I figured that it would be better not to like ape in at the top of the hype cycle. And I started doing some like marketing services for some ICOs and stuff. And I started getting paid in Bitcoin and I just kind of forgot about it for a while. And I was like, yeah, this stuff is cool, but I'm not too sure about it. And then there was DeFi Summer, which was 2020, I believe. And that's kind of when it came back under my radar. I guess that's also when activity started picking up because of the whole everything bubble that happened from the easy money era that we all miss so badly these days. But I was into DeFi because I could understand like the mechanics and like the application behind that use case. And then I heard about NFTs and I was a little bit skeptical. I remember NFT Summer was starting and I was on crypto Twitter and I was in the DeFi communities and stuff. And I was like, but what are we paying all this money for these JPEGs of monkeys for, right? And I was kind of a little bit like, And I did a bit of research, but I didn't jump. That I learned twice is, I guess 3 times. Once with Bitcoin, second time with Dogecoin when it went on that initial run. I was like, that's stupid. It's a bubble, right? And then I called it stupid and I missed a whole bunch of opportunities to make a profit. And then NFTs, but then NFTs, I was kind of like, okay, look, you can call it stupid and lose an opportunity to make some money, or you can jump on the hype train and ride it out. So the first NFT that I minted was Parallel Alpha, their card drop, actually, which was pretty cool. And then I think I bought a Pudgy Penguin, and then I bought an MVHQ pass. I think it was somewhat like that, if I remember correctly. I'd probably have to go back and check the blockchain to tell you the absolute truth, but somewhere along that line. And then I kind of got drawn into MVHQ and the rest is history.
That's a good story and good memory as well, actually, from your side, remembering all those pieces too. So, I mean, since that time, we've seen a lot in the NFT space, right? So, I mean, how would you define the last year? Is it us testing and seeing what's effective? Is it typical growing pains? Is it rapid innovation with some existing issues? Like, how do you think about that last year that we've kind of had?
Well, we are entering a new era of this maturity of crypto, and NFTs are like the one that kind of made sense to the mainstream. So like before, the ICOs were basically like very good ideas that just didn't work in practice, right? It was like, we've got this awesome business idea, but there are no users for it. So it was all just bubbles, right? DeFi was cool, but DeFi was too big brained, right? I mean, they had to do like 40,000 APRs for the small brains to understand it, like the Ohm forks and all that stuff. But everyone else was kind of like, okay, but how does it work, right? But then NFTs create the culture, right? They create the emotional identity, they create the attachment, like they create that sense of belonging, the community, and like that kind of like cult like following. You don't get a cult like DeFi protocol. Go ahead, yeah.
No, you're good to go. Keep going.
Oh, I thought you said something. Sorry. Yeah. So I would say that the NFTs were kind of the thing that helped to cross at least the chasm of awareness, probably not adoption quite yet. into the mainstream, and for good and bad, because we have had a lot of pains with rug pulls and frauds and stuff that have gone, the mainstream media does like to focus on these things a lot in crypto. And I see that NFTs have kind of like, made people more aware. And that's what's starting this transition from where the people, like the talent from Web 2 is starting to enter into Web 3 full time, right? And before NFTs, they were just kind of like, oh, that's cool, right? But I don't know if it's going anywhere. And some of the smart guys were like, tinkering around with it, just like playing and having some fun. But then, like now we've started to see some migration and some of the brain drain from Web 2 into Web 3. So, I mean, like NFTs kind of represent that .com bubble in a sense, where like all of these new concepts came out. Most of them failed, but some of them will become the brands that we remember, like Facebook, Amazon, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like that's a more solid analogy than, everyone. Sometimes we all probably hear like the .com parallel that exists, but then it kind of stops there. There's like literally nothing more to it other than that, which is obviously centered around the fact that prices just goes that far, and it's technology. I guess that's as far as it goes. So I like that you were able to take it a step beyond that in terms of the connection that exists. So obviously we've seen a lot of concepts around memes and community. What are your thoughts there? Is that use case here to stay? Is it just the component of use cases that will have more elements and therefore only be part of what will be necessary for success? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, like memes are narratives, right? And I think that we kind of dismiss memes as like childish or like goofy kinds of things just because of the way that they exist in GIFs. But then, like, the concept of the meme existed long before the internet did, right? It's just like a cultural message that becomes viral because people resonate with it. So obviously it's a sign of the times, right? Like when something becomes a meme, it's something that is catching enough people's attention to really take off. Sometimes that's because there are, like some of the influencers just like shilling it because there's like, it's kind of like a falsely inflated meme. And but I mean, I guess we see that, right? We see that some memes are very short-lived. And that's because like they take their they get a little bit of boost, but then they don't get a longevity from the actual community. Some influencers start shilling it, but then it doesn't actually go further than that. But then, like memes are what drive the entire existence of like human purchasing decisions, right? Like even if you get away from, let's say, I don't know, let's say if you step into fashion, for example, right? Like there are memes that drive those markets, which eventually become translated as trends, right? So like there was a fashion trend of baggy clothes after COVID because everyone was stuck inside and they didn't have a chance to actually like work on their bodies, right? So it kind of represents an era of culture there. So of course it's going to become quite prevalent still.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying a lot. The reason I like it is not just are you making it really clear with good examples, right? And not just that it's probably making everyone listening in the live crowd right now pretty happy, right? that we're not delusional. Why I like it also, I mean, it parallels what our conversation with Mick was like last week as well. Because we talked about memes there also. It kind of makes me feel like there maybe is even a need to like rebrand memes, right? And like maybe intentionally not use the word memes so much, right? Because like the options are either we keep using the word meme, but like the outside world, right? The kind of newbies and those folks, just think of memes in a very narrow way, which is memes equals stupid, right? Like it's kind of that simple, right? Like a silly thing. Or we like actively redefine it so that it's around trends and the actual thought that exists behind it, right? Not just something that's pure stupid necessarily. So yeah, I really, really like what you're saying. It kind of ties into, I guess, a related question that I had, which is, what your thought process was with trading over the past while, right? The past year, which I'm assuming, what your job was to categorize things into two buckets, right? Is this like a forced meme where this is something very fleeting and therefore you might want to trade it faster, versus not a forced meme, an actual trend, in which case, there's something to really dig into here. Is that it's obviously very, very oversimplified, but is that a pretty reasonable simplification of how you were thinking about it?
Yeah, and it's quite hard to actually do that, which is kind of why communities like this exist, is because people help each other understand the stickiness of me. They can see that if it's something that's sticking within a particular alpha group or a community that has varying levels of expertise, then obviously it will have better staying power. I guess it's just kind of like patterns, right? Because like you get used to recognizing patterns, and then like it's, Web3 is really like a landmine. It's just like, I guess that's why people are, that's kind of why this whole like degen label gets flaunted, because it's something to be proud of, that you've survived the minefield, right? And you've made it through without stepping on enough landmines to totally ruin you. Because like it's impossible to get through without actually losing money on certain things, right? You see things that seem like they're actually going to have potential, and then something ridiculous happens. Like you never know, right? So, I mean, like for example, cases like for example, Steppen's move to earn was a very good use case that totally capitulated because they didn't design underlying mechanics, but that meme of move to earn actually has some kind of staying power because it gives someone an ability to do something outside of the actual, like the tunnels of Discord or the Metaverse or the depths of DeFi that we all currently just go digging through, right? So it's a combination of like how that fits into, the need in society, and then whether that's going to be a slow burn type of thing that takes a lot of time and effort to actually get some momentum, or if it's something that's just playing off of recent events like like the whole Irene DAO type of thing, right? It just fires off like crazy. Nobody really knows why, but it's just like super cool, right? And everybody thinks that that's a great concept. So yeah, there's kind of a bit of a balance. And I guess as you spend more time in this field, and as you make some money and lose some money, you kind of develop more of an intuitive sense of why something doesn't feel good. And I guess it helps, especially in like such a bear market as we are in now, to have a sense of critical doubt, right? So initially approach from a criticism point of view and like kind of try to convince yourself otherwise. And then when you're in a full bull market, you go the other way around where you just ape and think later.
Yeah. That makes total sense. It's a good framework as well. I remember the whole Irene DAO time. That's a good throwback there that I hadn't thought of in a while. This is also not a call to action for anybody to go create like a Corn Boy NFT collection. That's not where we're pushing people at all right now. So I think
it's already been done.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's already been done.
Oh, it's been done. I missed it. My bad.
It's too late. Yeah.
So I think this is a good logical place to like split the conversation, right? So like as we've been evolving NFTs and like what the definition are and what are ongoing trends and where the world is going memes versus just these fleeting things, right? So it's a logical place, I think, to talk about regenerative finance. So can you maybe explain at a high level what regenerative finance is to the crowd, or at least how to think about it?
Yeah, so first of all, regenerative finance is not going to be something that you're going to be able to like ape in on and get 100x returns. Although I guess you kind of did with Klima, because Klima DAO was one of the first ones, but that was because Klima was actually, it was an Ohm fork. So if anyone's not familiar with Ohm, it was Olympus, and they had, they were very innovative because they came up with the idea of protocol owned liquidity, which basically meant that users would, they would, instead of just swapping, they would give their ETH to the protocol in exchange for some of the native token of that protocol, which was Ohm. And then they would get the protocol is able to build a treasury much easier and faster But then the problem is that they offered like Ponzi-nomic yields, right? And KlimaDAO did this all in the name of the climate, right? So they were trying to put carbon credits on chain and create a demand. And it was interesting, right? It caught a lot of people's attention. But then, of course, when the token goes from like, I think it was like 2,000 to about 3.5, and then down to about $4 or something over time, then yeah, obviously it's a broken model, right? Like the whole system doesn't work. And so like regenerative finance is not, that's a bit of a tangent, but regenerative finance is not something that's just going to help you get rich quick. But it is a sustainable use case that helps to build some kind of like useful real world application that provides more in return than it takes. So it's attempting to create incentives that create positive sum economics, right? So that people are motivated to work together. Now, it's not always perfect, right? There's always going to be someone who wants to take, right? And the thing is, like, you try to create use cases that people want to contribute to, that are like intrinsically motivating for people to become a part of, because they feel like they're adding something to the greater good. And then when that grows, it should create a virtuous flywheel where as more people become involved, it adds more value to other people, and so on and so forth, right?
Yep. So let's maybe contextualize that a little bit for some people, right? So, can you give a few examples or a couple examples of use cases that might exist here? Let's maybe dig into that a little bit so we can start to see who can add value, how people can add value, and kind of, see some examples.
Yeah, so I mean, like, there's one that I talked about already, which is the carbon credits. Carbon credits are a bit hard to work with, though. I mean, one positive thing about the carbon credit market on the blockchain is it's easier for people who want to offset their carbon footprint to just go and buy some of the it's BCT, which is essentially just a token that represents a carbon credit. So like any kind of user, if you fly like 6 times a week or something and you feel guilty that you're polluting, then you can just go there and buy, right? There's another one that I'm working on right now. I can kind of ground it down into some use cases where, like, our first MVP is going to be sustainable fashion. And we're aiming to create infrastructure so that, small micro brands are able to collaborate and pool resources together in order to compete with fast fashion. So brands like H&M or Zara and things like that, like, they have an inherent advantage because they have economies of scale, right? They can just like churn out production as quickly as possible. And like, as a conscious consumer, if you want to buy something that's eco-friendly, you obviously pay a pretty big premium because there's no economies of scale, and you are, you have to pay for like each individual level of the supply chain to add value there, right?
Just to pause for a second there. I mean, just so everyone's on the same page here, what Tyler's really getting at there with economies of scale, right, is these are mega brands, mega businesses that exist, right? Because they're mega businesses that exist, they can afford to turn things very fast. They can afford to have a design team that's constantly working. They can afford to do that. But you, as mini brand startup person, creating a new thing, you can't do that, right? You can't have like a design team that's constantly shipping things. You don't get to buy raw materials at a tremendously low rate, things like that. So that's the competition he's laying out there. Sorry, Tyler, go ahead, man.
No worries. No, yeah, that's exactly a very good thing to clarify. I mean, like, for example, these brands, they will do little drops every single weekend in their stores because they want to keep people coming back, right? Like, there are some fashion addicts who go shopping in the malls every single weekend. And if they go by a store and they see that the same display is there that was last week, and they don't enter it because they think that there's nothing new and they know everything that's in there already. So in order to like encourage increased consumerism and, of course, business, they have to continually ship, and they're constantly shipping out new drops so that they can keep up with the trends, and then they can also like lure people into their stores, right? And then like as an individual designer or as a micro factory or as like, some kind of like small fashion creator, it's very hard to compete there because you basically have to rely on people who are willing to pay a premium for these things. So, like basically what happens is we create a collaborative infrastructure through blockchain technologies that is essentially it's existing as like the protocol that they can sell their products on, and then also that creators can use to create IP. So like say for example you're a designer, right? You can put your design up as an NFT, and then you can license it to other types of designers or other types of people along that value chain, and take a revenue share for that, a royalty share, sorry. And or you can choose not to license it, right? It's your choice what you do with it. It's not like you're obligated to, but it's open sourcing things that are previously unable to be open sourced, right? There have been some Web 2 platforms that have tried to do this, but there's no transparency and there's no product provenance, right? So product provenance means you can see like where that came from. So like, for example, if you're looking at, a pair of shoes, you can track the footprint in terms of carbon or water used, but then you can also track the use of this. If it's like product provenance also means if a famous person bought these shoes, for example, or whatever, right? I don't know if you'd want to buy someone else's shoes, but it's a pretty bad example. But you can just see where it came from and what value was added to it and who was involved in it, right? And which designers were contributing to it and what value they added. So then, like also, for example, if there's a as a designer, if you source out a supplier, like a micro factory, then that's also something that you can turn into like an NFT that's also licensable and that you can use to add value to that supply chain. So it's essentially leveling the playing field so that as more people come together, they can lower the costs and the challenges and the inefficiencies that they face while trying to create sustainable products. And then that will in turn enable them to ship these products more rapidly and at better prices for consumers who want to buy them. And then as consumers buy them, they can also invest in them as NFTs, kind of like the whole music NFT model where you buy it and then you receive a share of the royalties, right? You can invest in the pre-sale and then you can own that share of that product value chain. And then if it has, if it does really well, then it grows, right? And then you can also gain some small share of the royalties and feel like you're also contributing to the growth of that creator too.
But yeah, let's just pull that apart for a sec, just to make sure everyone's on the same page here, right? So in the example that you gave, right, there's several parties who can be involved in this case, right? Like there's the raw material provider, for instance, there's the brand itself, there's the design elements that exist, maybe even the community, like you said, they can contribute to, and therefore it can utilize NFTs and consequently smart contracts to track transactions that have been made and distribute according to that, right? Is that like a reasonably good summary?
Yeah, and ownership, right? So then, the most important thing is that each contributor gets the true value for their work put in, right? And that's all transparent, traceable, and visible. And that enables them to also be incentivized to add more value because they see that as they contribute more. Essentially, like someone who contributes enough value could effectively, if they do well enough, they could take the majority of the share of that particular element of that value chain. So like if you have up to a certain limit of like physical capacity, right? Like if you have really good, organic cotton that ships really quickly and it's the right kind of fabric that people need, then that would, that supplier, because they're motivated to do that and because there's demand for it, they could take the lion's share of that particular element of that chain there.
Knowing our audience's or some of our audience's backgrounds, I have a feeling that, and personalities, and I have a feeling this could extend to the marketing side of things as well, right? Because if you think about the full value chain, it's okay, yes, it's like product and operations and all those kinds of things. but it also has to be marketed, right? For instance, let's just say there's like a brand that's based in the US that sources to China, a pretty typical example, right, that exists. Of course, they have to market it effectively and generate hype and buzz and get people to purchase and all those good kinds of things. Is there a way to include the marketing and promotion side of things in the value chain such that like the marketer can get credit? So for instance, if somebody in here, or if I wanted to, I don't want to run the brand itself. I don't want to, I don't want to manage operations or production. I solely just want to be the person that hypes up the brand and generates a lot of sales, right? Is that something that's possible to integrate into this? Account for?
Yeah. So I mean, like marketing techniques, like playbooks, best practices. I mean, anything that you could basically deem this your IP, and then like demonstrate because of your provable track history on the blockchain that it is something that adds value, and then people would be motivated to come and enlist in that service from you.
Very cool. It's a very, very cool concept. The interesting, actually, before I keep going, that there is a question from the crowd, which is, are you thinking of doing, I guess it's a different application, are you thinking of doing a cloud kitchen type model? And if so, where is the production going to be done? Those are the couple questions. So I guess the real question is, will this apply also to like a food model as well? Could this apply to a food model as well?
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with Cloud Kitchen's model, but basically, like it's decentralized, right? So all of these things, the whole purpose is to create decentralized brands, so that each element can come from a different source, right? And then because it's traceable, you can really see like who does what and where. So production can happen anywhere, right? Like if there's, like if I find a nice organic cotton supplier here in Turkey, we can bring that person on board. If there's some good quality fabric coming out of India, for example, right? It doesn't really matter exactly where it comes from. It just matters if it is something that the designers want to use, right? So it's kind of like up to the person at the next stage of the value chain to decide if that's something that fits their needs. And then if it is, they interact with it, and then they start integrating that into their product, right? So, I mean, it is like our MVP is fashion, but yeah, it could go for many different models, right? So like, there's many different use cases that we're planning to expand out into. And this is just kind of like the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah, it seems to me too, Ranch, like this seems to be a very parallel setup. Obviously, one being products and one being food, which is, I guess, technically a product as well, right? It seems very, very parallel, right? Regardless, you have to source like where the product is manufactured or produced, which is the same premise as like cloud kitchens, depending upon who the ownership of the cloud kitchens, et cetera, right? So it seems very parallel to the example that Tyler gave. I can't see any reason why that would have a limitation also. I guess it's more about just determining what the value is that the cloud kitchen might be providing and quantifying that, and that whole kind of question, which is a pretty interesting one. Tyler.
Yeah, and making it accessible too, right? So that there's ease of access.
Yep, that makes sense. And with that, I guess, comes transparency and visibility in terms of what options exist, right? It's almost like a review site or something, so you can see the different sourcing options that may exist and make a decision wisely, that whole kind of a thing, which I assume is part of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like quality control is key here, right? Because it has to be verified that it is what it is, right? So that nobody comes in and just like sells, I don't know, sheep wool as organic cotton or something like that. So yeah, I mean, like the whole thing, there's a decentralized nature, but then there's also like a degree of vetting and enabling like experts to enter the protocol, and then creating like a community of people who continue to vet this as well, right?
Very cool. Very, very cool. So here's my related question, Tyler. So given that what you're suggesting will probably become an increasing proportion of use cases of NFTs, right? And obviously it gets integrated into what you're doing. What do you think this will do perception-wise for outsiders' understanding of NFTs? And do you even think the term NFT will be around and mentioned as it relates to something like this, right? So I guess what I'm really asking is, do you think this will help outsiders' perceptions of what NFTs are and the functionality and capabilities, even though we know that exists for several projects too, as it relates to membership access and utility and a whole variety of things? Or do you think, as this continues to develop, that the word NFT won't even be mentioned in something like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the reason why why I decided to get involved in this and why I'm so passionate about it, is because I personally believe, like, just to back up a little bit, it's very interesting to go and read some of the anti-NFT comments, just to kind of get in the minds of these people and see why they are so against NFTs. And it's just kind of like a misconception that we're trying to like hyper capitalize, hyper commoditize, like turn everything into an asset and like attach a number to it and hyper financialize. And in a sense, that is what the recent NFT boom has been about. And that's also why soulbound tokens are quite revolutionary, because soulbound tokens are kind of like a way to shape identity on the blockchain. There is a little bit of like risk of turning into a dystopian social credit type of era with that. But I mean, if it's done with zero knowledge proofs, which essentially keep specific information private only to you, but then display if it exists or not to other people, then it can work, right? And like what a soulbound token is essentially it's an NFT that cannot be transferred. And Vitalik and his pals released a very interesting white paper about it back in, I think, February. And essentially what they're proposing is that you use this to represent your on-chain identity. So you could say, for example, this is your CV, right? I did a bit of dev work for Unity Labs, and then sign that off and they prove it, right? And then, as you go throughout the Web3 verse, your history of work and your history of interactions is proven and verifiable, and then you can use that to represent your, for example, work identity. Or you could use it to represent your passions. You've been to these many concerts. You can display these concert tickets. You can show that you're a fan of these bands and stuff like that. That you're a diehard fan, right? I mean, it could do a lot for dating as well and education, right? If you have verifiable assignments, so people can't like cheat in college, right? So I imagine like a future of education where you go to university, you have a soulbound token which represents your history at that university, and then every assignment is sent to you as an NFT. You sign off on it, and then that prevents you from getting other people to do your work. And then all of those NFTs collate into one big NFT that forms your degree, right? So that you can't bribe your professor to get a degree, which does happen quite a lot, more than people know. So like the whole thing of NFTs avoiding this financialization, I think is key to actually make sense to people, because like a lot of them see it as just, degenerate flipping and like, trying to squeeze money out of nothing. And like, I guess like, the whole, the valuation of ether rocks, for example, really doesn't help it, because it's just a picture of a rock that's worth like, I don't know what they're at now, but they did get to several $100,000, right? It just kind of, it looks absolutely absurd to people, right? They don't understand that there is some historical value or whatever to these NFTs, or that they represent like a slice of history that people will look back at as museum, kind of like as they do in a museum, or maybe they'll all forget about it, right? We don't know at this point. So, I mean, like, in order to, it's kind of, I mean, like coming back to the question of whether people will know them as NFTs, it's kind of like whether people know SaaS, for example, right? People who work in the industry do, but then a lot of people just like interact with certain things and they don't actually know what's happening under the hood, right? They just understand brands. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a better way to kind of call these things, but I think that in the sense of like the use cases that we're explaining, they won't know because they'll just be interacting in a way that's like cryptographically secure or something like that, right? It'll just be like verified, encrypted, and secure. They won't actually know the underlying mechanics of how it works.
that makes complete sense. That makes complete sense. And so for anybody who's coming in right now, we're talking with Tyler about the topic of regenerative finance. And I just want to be very clear that we're not saying degenerative finance. We're saying regenerative finance right now, although degenerative finance might be a thing that many of us are familiar with it as well. And it kind of does bring up a question that you touched on a little bit earlier, which is, is there a line that exists here? So, okay, you use the examples and the use cases that you talked about with regenerative finance. There are many more that exist, right? So it's more of a pragmatic application, utilizes smart contracts, pay people according to the value. There are still NFTs that exist in there, right? There's still an opportunity for early access. There's still an opportunity for research and finding where things may be underpriced. So do traders just want to trade? And there's always going to be an opportunity, even in these real use cases, but maybe the public's perception will improve as it relates to what NFTs are or what the technology can do or that kind of a thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is essentially kind of like investing in a startup, right? So it depends on how you do it. Like if you can invest in like an early stage, or you can get on the pre-sale for the NFT, right? I mean, like, going back to the use case of sustainable fashion, if you are one of the pre-sale NFT buyers of some kind of like shoe model that really takes off and becomes like super popular, then you could be exposed to immense upside. So there is always going to be a speculative aspect in all kinds of assets. It doesn't matter what they are. But then I think that the tokenomic models of regenerative finance are trying to create less extractive value, because, like, for example, in DeFi, one of the biggest issues is mercenary capital. And mercenary capital is just basically money that jumps around to the highest yield, right? So as soon as there are some incentives going on one platform, all of the money zaps out of the old platform and goes over there. This is what SushiSwap did to Uniswap back in DeFi summer. Is basically they gave some very nice boosted rewards, and then everybody just pulled out of Uniswap and went over to SushiSwap as quickly as possible. And then that was kind of like the issue that they were trying to solve, because capital is only loyal to the highest yield, right? So, there is no attachment. I guess that's also coming back to the whole, emotional identity that comes in with NFTs, is that's what prevents people from selling, is they think that, like, this is really cool, it's going to stick, it's a cultural meme, right? We don't see that with like Sushi Coin or Yam or any of these weird food coins that were popping all up during the DeFi summer. So, there is, I guess, like, it kind of ties back to, like, we call ourselves degens because we're proud that we have survived this long. Which is in fact quite a feat, right? Like, it takes a lot of energy to make sure that you don't get wiped out. It's easy to make money, it's harder to preserve money. So, I think that the degenerative aspect it's kind of a bit of a misnomer, to be honest. It's more like, you survived a bunch of rug pulls and you made it through, and then you continue to speculate. But then if you think about it, people who invest in regenerative finance are also speculating, but they're speculating and they have some kind of intrinsic motivation because they feel that their speculation is going to add value to society as well. And as it adds that value, then other people will gain too, right? Because, like, if you think about like a lot of these degen mints for NFTs, essentially it's a game of like musical chairs, and like the last one holding the bag is the loser. It's a zero-sum game, right? And nobody wants to be that person, so they just get in and out as quickly as possible. And well, I mean, it's more visible with NFTs because there's a lower supply, but it's essentially the same thing with any of the crypto coins as well, right? You just want to get out of there before anyone does. So, that's also, I guess, regenerative finance creates a kind of like intrinsic motivation to stay. Kind of like NFTs create an intrinsic motivation through the culture and through the memes and through the sense of belonging and being a part of this community. Because with regenerative finance, you feel like, yeah, I invested some money, I took out my principal, and I'm going to keep some in there because I think that they're going to continue adding value, and they're maybe going to, save the world or save the penguins or whatever, right? All kinds of like different use cases, or another even simple case also is there are lots of regenerative finance platforms that are doing microloans for small businesses that don't have access to capital in frontier markets, right? So in a sense, you're actually taking a huge risk there by putting your capital into a frontier market where there's very little infrastructure, but there's a potential of huge return because the market is quite untouched. So yeah, I mean, there's different ways of looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're listening in right now and you're wondering why the heck are we talking about regenerative finance here? I mean, it's just a definitional thing. Like, we're doing the same thing as traders, as investors, that we've been doing, which is just spotting memes, trends, right? As we kind of redefined this week and last week, and investing in it. And if we think there's an opportunity, catching it early, or trying to get on the whitelist, or whatever version, or the ICO, or whatever version of it that exists. So it's the same premise. It also happens to be really interesting too in terms of where things are going, but it's the same idea, just with a different use case and different application that exists. So let's actually shift sides a little bit then to the geographic side of things, because I want to be mindful of time that we have. So what's interesting to me about Turkey is, where you are, is how much it over indexes in crypto and Web3 uptake. So, first off, are your friends in Turkey into NFTs and crypto? Like, what's your direct group's pulse on it? Do they think you're a lunatic? Like, what does that feel like?
Well, I mean, it's quite commonly, it's like very socially accepted around here. And I always find it amusing to tell people, it's kind of like a bit of a social experiment of mine to tell people that I'm into crypto and see what their response is, right? You get either like, oh, are you mining? And it's like, yeah, that was like several years ago. My cousin or my friend's uncle or whatever was into crypto and he lost his apartment or his car or something like that, right? So their associations with that is like, degenerative gambling, which, I mean, you can do degenerative gambling in a number of forms. Crypto just happens to be the one that captures the most attention because of how sharp the risks and returns are. But I mean, like, it's funny because, like, it's very common that you come across people who are into it. Like, I remember I was sitting in a cafe once in like a pretty upscale part of town, and I looked over. My wife went to the bathroom, and I looked over, and I was like, "Oh, that's OpenSea." The dude sitting at the table next to me was telling his friend about like what NFTs were, and he was showing him his OpenSea. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, you guys are looking at NFTs," and this was actually still quite early. It was, I think, like August, or no, it wasn't August. It was after the loot thing. It was like October, which was still relatively early, right? And yeah, then I ended up, he's a friend of mine, and we've been in touch ever since, right? We kind of made friends over me snooping in on his conversation and finding out that he's into NFTs. But I guess there are very few people, if you think about it, like globally, there was not very many people who were actually into it at that time. So, I mean, still. But then, yeah, like the thing is, in Turkey, you've got a lot of people who think that there is like an opportunity to make easy money in crypto. But then you've also got a lot of people who are into it for the like the tech. Like, I know a guy personally who's got absolutely no knowledge of like the trends. He doesn't know who Vitalik Buterin is, but he is one of the best coders that I've talked to based on like what I've seen, his knowledge of like how bots work and algorithms and stuff like that, right? And he knows like code inside out and upside down, but he's got no idea, and he does not really care to know about like the narrative and the trends of the market or anything like that. And that's why we became friends, is because he actually kind of like, I'm more of the social context, he's more of the tech context, right? So yeah, you get all kinds of different profiles of people who have different knowledge or experience with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sounds like so there's certainly that. What else is actually going on? Like, what is going on with Turkey in general as to like why there's also so much interest? Is it also, obviously there's inflation issues that exist, there may be other issues. Is there anything else that's like breeding this really perfect climate such that people are so interested into this as well, or so that they're of the mindset to be open-minded to things like this? Like, what do you think is going on there? I'm just curious.
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, like, inflation is an issue. Everybody knows that. So then lots of people are financially motivated to buy things that are not Turkish lira, right? So they will be buying things like US dollar, euro, not so much anymore, because it's obviously not worth much. But I guess anything is a hedge against the lira, right? Because it basically it continues to devaluate steadily. So like it's interesting because you will see, like, you know, you go to the tailor and you'll see that he's got US dollars in cash in his wallet, right? So it's kind of like it's a mattress money. So crypto's like that, and then people either use it as a hedge or they try to make money, additional money, right? Interestingly enough, the top signal that I saw for the meme coin season last time was we got in a taxi, and the driver was trading Shiba on Binance. And I was like, oh boy, time to get out of the meme coins. And in fact, they did actually collapse a few days later. So yeah, there's that. And then there's also like Turkey is an economy that kind of functions off of hot money. So there's, like, you know, other countries that have inflation, they have put forth very strict capital controls. And Turkey is quite the opposite. They did implement a few mild capital controls and a few incentives where, like, you know, you could put some money in such and such account and it will pay you the difference in the dollar value if the dollar devaluates, things like that, right? For people who don't really want to take risks like crypto. But then, like, you know, the overnight swap rate on the Turkish lira is enormous. So lots of people come in here and just take advantage of the repo. And then, like, it's an easy way to park your money. I guess not so much anymore because it's a huge risk. So that's one thing. And then arbitrage opportunities. There's lots of arbitrage opportunities. So people are kind of like running money in and out and around and through different directions like that too.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, just to kind of reiterate what he's saying there, right? Which is when he's talking about repos or anything else, this is just like short-term volatility and arbitrage opportunities to be able to make money on these short-term opportunities. That's the short way, I guess, to describe it. But one thing that really strikes me too, and it I'll have to have one of our couple folks that we have in here from this country on the show sometime soon. But what's really, really interesting to me is when you start to talk about things like inflation, right, and monetary issues and all those. Like, one of the first countries that's going to come into most people's minds will probably be Argentina, right? Like, this has happened it's happening now. It's happened many times over. As we all know, there's like a black market for currency that exists there, right? They tend to operate very much in US dollars. What's also super interesting as I started to like dig into the data is Turkey and Argentina are like, at least as it relates to both income and like population and demographics, are like almost identical. Like, they're literally at the same point in the list in terms of GDP, per capita GDP, in terms of income levels, in terms of age. The median age is 0.2 years apart. The percent of people who are under 18 is almost identical, literally identical setups that exist, right? For like the leading indicators in terms of what it would look like. And they're both highly inflationary economies, as you pointed out as well, with Turkey. But I don't think the uptake in Argentina is even close to the same as what's in Turkey. And again, I don't want to speak out of line here, so I think it's important why we get somebody on who's in Argentina, who sees the day-to-day, who sees what's going on, and maybe has a bit of data. But I guess the question I have is what do you think the path is to wider adoption that exists? Like, if you were to go into a country like Argentina, we had, K-Fish on here recently, who's in Chile, for instance. His comment was just pragmatic use cases, right? Pragmatic use cases day to day that will get people on board. Is that true in every case? Is it just enough to have, inflation heavy countries and that should drive it? Like, what do you think is going on there? What do you think gets us to mass adoption? How do you think that goes?
Yeah, I would speculate, although I'm not like an expert on Argentina, I would speculate that there's stricter capital controls there, so there's less ease of access. I mean, like in Turkey, there are multiple local exchanges and they advertise everywhere. Like you go to the movie, you see a Bitcoin advertisement, the tram is covered in Bitcoin, right? It's just like all kinds of like blatant advertisement and marketing. But then that's also because like I said, there's a lot of hot money. Want ease of money flow throughout the country because like tons and tons of foreign investors come in here, and that's kind of what like keeps the Turkish economy going is foreign money, right? Tourism money, and also like investment from like big funds and stuff like that. And then Turkey is also geopolitically quite valuable. Like it's a very strategic location, and the Bosphorus Strait is also like it's a choke point for the Black Sea. So lots of people, lots of political interest want to put money in here. So then the government purposefully kind of like leaves it open, and crypto just happens to be like an unsuspecting benefactor of that. The government's policy on crypto is very ambiguous. They don't even know how to tax it. I think that they're trying to figure something out. I mean, they did recently just restrict, or was it last year? They restricted like ramps to exchanges, which basically just kind of like made it slightly more difficult for like retail users to get their money onto exchanges. But I mean, there's always a way around it, right? So yeah, I mean, I would say also Turkey, like Turkish people in general are quite like Western looking. Like they're quite liberal, and I guess it depends on where you go in the country. There's a lot of contrasts, but like the people who do adopt crypto are very liberal, and they do spend a lot of time on social media, and they are like quite well versed in it. There are conferences and stuff around here too. There are little crypto communities. There are NFT projects. Fluffy Polar Bears is a Turkish artist and a Turkish team. I'm sure there's lots of other examples, but there are, there is presence, right? So there is like intrinsic interest as well, right? Just because like a lot of the youth are very, very keen to like participate and keep up with the trends that are going on in the West too, right? So
yeah, it's so interesting, this concept of like, how would you create a culture in a country that is open-minded, right? Like it's like very parallel to like talking with Mick in Australia, right? It's very similar, obviously not same dynamics in terms of economically and other things, but very similar like mentality, I would say, for Australia, for instance. And then other countries, UK, not that way at all, right? So it's a very interesting concept. So, one of the things you touched on also was in terms of social media trends and other things. So a question we have from the crowd is, have you seen ENS adoption amongst Turkish Twitter users? I don't know if you know the answer to that, or if you poked around, but do you happen to know the answer to that?
I honestly can't give a good enough answer to say something about that. Yeah. Most of my Twitter is actually, like I don't really know too many Turkish users on Twitter, to be frank. But I know a small handful, but I don't think I have seen a lot, and I haven't seen a large enough data sample to actually give a full answer on that. So
yeah, maybe the question also, Robot, to maybe we could find a data point for it, is what social media platforms they're using, right? Twitter being, of course, the main one, with NFTs originally integrated, but of course Instagram would be a pretty good proxy too, right? With the recent integration that exists there too, and depending upon if those, we have to assume those platforms are used, but I don't want to speak out of turn. But if that's what's used heavily, right, that might be like a reasonable indicator too, possibly. So, yeah. I just want to be mindful of time. Maybe last question before we wrap up here, and we may know the answer to this already. But what are you overall most excited about, Tyler, in Web3? Like, what's your mind? What's really got you excited for, near term, midterm, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I would say like longer term is regenerative finance, because of its ability to kind of like win over the haters, and how it actually kind of creates a virtuous use case that people can believe in. So, yeah, and then also like how it gives better access to people who are inherently disadvantaged. So like people who want to come in, they have the tools available. I guess that's what Web3 is all about, right? Is it's kind of leveling the playing field for everybody who wants to come in. The only problem is we've just got so much of this fog of war of like, misinformation and scams and stuff that scares people away. So it is honestly like it's the final frontier, right? It's like if you were sailing off to America to go discover this crazy wild land. I think like midterm, I would say identity on chain. like I mentioned with soulbound tokens, I would like to see like more proof of human type of things emerging. There is Rabbit Hole that's doing something that's quite interesting, and Lens Protocol, and what's this other one here? There's one other one that's making some like human Bright ID, yeah. So that kind of stuff is pretty cool, because that also, it does provide like very low risk tolerance to get into crypto. It's like go and buy some Bitcoin or some Ethereum, and that's it, right?
No, I'm not telling this to my my more conservative friends at this point. I don't want to get 20 phone calls a day in terms of how to do this, what goes on. Like, it's almost uncomfortable to tell your friends about it.
Yeah. Well, I made a course like crypto for beginners, and I made it as like an absolute zero level, like crypto for zero knowledge types of people, where I just kind of like show how to use Binance and how to like make a transaction, just to kind of like help people move money around and like, get into it, buy some Ethereum and stuff like that. And I think that that's enough, right? So I do get lots of dumb questions, and I love it because it also gives me insight into like what people's pain points are. But then I also kind of have this resource that I point people to for them to go and learn and study, right? I mean, lots of people come in because they're like, oh, you can get rich, right? And then like one guy was telling me like, oh, I'm running low on money and I need to make some. And I was like, nope, sorry, I don't think that's a good idea, right? Because it's like you don't gamble with your rent money. So yeah. Well, and then other things too in the short term, I would say like I'm not sure what to say about NFTs, because I think we're going through a bit of a soul searching moment where we're trying to find our identity. I think that the whole intellectual property and like the CCO thing, and what A16Z just released this, what did they release? Like these kind of like IP contracts that you can fork on GitHub is pretty cool stuff. Don't be evil is what they called it. I think that that's really cool for NFTs. That will kind of create more verifiable trust. And then, that's probably it for now.
Yeah. I mean, look, to some extent, right, this bear that we're experiencing right now might be coming at a good time, right, where we can put our heads down, build, set up the things, courses, infrastructure, other things that are going to make the next wave of people comfortable, more open to it. Maybe it's also, like you said, like a little bit of a rebranding exercise to some extent, such that by the time the economy is a little bit better, global economy is a little bit better, we have all of those pieces in place and everybody's ready to, to jump in, more comfortable to jump in, and the whole industry goes where we want it to go. So yeah, this conversation today was awesome, Tyler. Really, really appreciate your thought and everything that you shared. Anybody who's listening, check out Tyler on TikTok as well. I don't know if he's still putting videos on there, but I know he does that intermittently at least. They're really cool. And everybody who's listening live right now, thank you so much for joining as well. Really appreciate the questions. And again, this is created for all you guys, right? So if you ever have any feedback or thoughts or things that you want us to cover or anything, please just drop us a line. It's all here so that we can all learn together and have some fun with this. So thanks everybody for joining today. Really appreciate the conversation.